August Felker, welcome to Acquiring Minds.
Thank you, Will. It's great to be here.
August, I feel like you need no introduction because regular listeners will have heard your sponsorship copy. A two-time successful searcher, first with a traditional search fund, the second time around you did a self-funded search, and today you run Oberly Risk Strategies. People will recognize those words. But really, August, you do have two successful searches under your belt. You've been in this community for over a decade, I believe. Today, you work with searchers who are close to closing a deal on all things insurance. You've got deep expertise in the insurance business. We're going to get into all of it. So please start us off with some background on you, August.
Awesome. Well, Will, I'm pumped to be joining the podcast. I also am so happy to be kind of in partnership with you. It's been a great ride, and it's just amazing how the community's grown so much over the last 10 years. And thank you for all you've done to help that. So my quick background, I grew up in St. Louis, Missouri, very proud St. Louis Cardinals fan. Went to college at a small school in Maine called Bowdoin College. After graduating from college, I was excited to go and try to live out on the West Coast and moved to San Fran. Worked in the insurance business out there right after college. Met my wife out there. Love living in the Bay Area. Ended up living there for 7 years. But towards the end of my stay in the Bay Area, I linked up with a couple of guys who became very, very close mentors and got excited about the search fund space. And this was like 2008, 2009. And was very, very excited to try my hand at doing a search out of the Bay Area. My wife and I had one kid. And we were sort of at that point where we were flexible, and so that's sort of where the search story starts.
Were you associated with a business school out there?
I wasn't. So I when I was out in the Bay Area, I linked up with two guys who were Stanford GSBers who had used a search fund to buy a logistics business in South San Francisco. And I joined them as sort of one of their first sales hires, and just love the experience, love working for them, love the model. So when they ended up selling that business, I sort of partnered with them and said, hey, let's go out and do a search fund and do it together. And so that's how I got, into the world, of searching. I did not end up going to business school.
Mm-hmm. And had you expected that at some point in your life and your career, you'd be an entrepreneur, or did this come out of left field, the idea of this and therefore being an entrepreneur?
I didn't know, 100% that I wanted to be an entrepreneur. I sort of in my mind knew as I got older, I wanted to have some freedom and, I wanted to have a great career, and literally it was something I wanted to do. But I had no idea about the search fund world until I was sort of exposed to it. And that totally changed everything. And once I got, heard about it and learned about it, I almost became kind of unemployable. I was just an entrepreneur. I'll probably be an entrepreneur for life.
Cool. Yeah. Yeah. I think a lot of entrepreneurs have that moment.
Yeah.
So these two guys that you'd worked for before, they buy a business, they grow it, presumably they sell it, at which point, and you've been working for them through that exit, at which point you say to them, let's go do a search fund together, be my partners.
Yeah, exactly. So the model with them was they had already done a search. I was 29. I didn't really know how to do it, didn't know how to go about it, didn't know how to raise funds. And so they were sort of, they kind of vouched for me, and they sort of said to the investor community, hey, it was a traditional search I was going to do. At that time, there weren't a lot of them. So they sort of vouched for me, and they also said, hey, we'll sort of sit on your board, we'll mentor you, we'll coach you through the whole process, but we're not going to move out to wherever you end up buying a business. That was sort of my part.
So you were going to run it. It really was going to be the August Felker show. But they were kind of mentors, first investors, vouching for the investor community.
Yeah.
Okay.
Exactly.
So I wasn't active in this world at that time, but from my understanding, to do a traditional search fund at that time, to not have come out of an MBA program, which is really, as I understand it, the only place it was being talked about, you must have been pretty unusual to kind of be a self-starter to go do it.
I was. I mean, I got a lot of I didn't really get a lot of pushback, but I got a lot of questions about it. And I think the thing that kind of gave me comfort in sort of, moving across the country and wanting to buy a business was my experience working for these two guys in an environment really operating. I really got a lot of sort of on the ground experience running and managing a small business with these two. And so I felt like, even though I didn't have an MBA, I still like, hey, I think I can do this. And it gave me confidence. So, and then having them behind me sort of pushing me on saying, you can do this, was a huge part of it.
Cool. Really, really cool.
Yeah.
That kind of, hey, I think I can do this feeling, epiphany is one I've heard from a lot of my guests, where they kind of peer into an operating business and they realize that, I could do this too.
Yeah.
You've partnered with them in the Bay Area, but you say you're going to do a geographically agnostic search, or you're trying to get yourself back to the Midwest? Because I know that's where you end up. So
what I did is when I talked to my wife about this, I said, here's what I'm going to do. Here's this model. She was, in the middle of just a thriving career. And so I said, hey, so we sort of agreed to pick 10 cities. That was our compromise. And we went through a list, and most of them were actually on the West Coast. There were a few in the Midwest that I was looking at. Chicago was one, St. Louis was one, but most of them were on the West Coast. So I really focused my search just on those 10 cities. And I also, focused on insurance. So I mentioned earlier that I worked in insurance right out of school. One of the sort of my theories was, hey, I could really buy an insurance brokerage, and that would be a great search business. I know the industry. My dad used to be in the industry, so I had this experience where I was like, I think I can buy an insurance brokerage. I had 10 cities picked out. I didn't know what I didn't know, and my wife was on board, so we sort of launched in 2008.
And so she was willing to go to one of these 10 cities.
She was game.
Now, I didn't hear you mention the city that you ultimately ended up in the outskirts of. So how did you find this business outside Madison? And I don't know how far outside Madison it was. So tell us how you found this business.
I had a search where my strategy was heavy on cold calls. I was in sales before, so I was very comfortable getting on the phone and calling sellers. Got hung up on that. I was just, sort of totally okay with that process. And I also wrote a lot of handwritten letters. I didn't send a lot of emails. And sort of the third part of my strategy was to try to find a river guide, where you find someone that's going to hopefully give you a warm intro into a business or a seller. So one of my ideas was to call insurance magazines. There's this insurance magazine called the Insurance Journal, and I called the editors there because I was thinking, these people probably know a lot of people that own insurance agencies. They probably are pretty well connected. They've got their sort of feelers out there, and so I called them. And the editor called me back and said, I like your story. I know this gentleman who's got an agency and insurance brokerage for sale in Madison, and I'll make an intro. And so that was how I got connected to what ended up being my first deal. I should note that I really felt strongly going into my search that it was going to be really hard to do a brokerage search in the insurance space. There's a handful of insurance investment bankers and brokers. And I felt like every time I reached out to them, they could kind of get a sense that I'm only going to do one deal. They're probably going to send their best deals to, the roll-ups or the larger private equity firms that were getting in the space. I was at the very, very bottom of the list. And then even if I got invited to participate in some type of bid, I knew the investor group I had in the search in the traditional world, multiples were already starting to kind of go crazy, that it was going to be very hard to win those deals. So I sort of I've got to find a seller that just directly, and I also need to find a seller that kind of gets it, what I'm trying to do. I really felt like, hey, I could be sort of the son that a seller never had, to kind of take over the business and come in and learn the business and ask questions and keep the culture going and stay independent. So I was really trying to, I knew that was my only shot. And so when I got this intro to this person in Madison, I felt like really lucky. And that was very early on in my search. It was like the first or second month.
Wow. And August,
and
all that stuff that
yeah.
you just said about the son that the owner never had and continuing the legacy, those are all kind of catchphrases that are well known in the search community today.
Yeah.
But I suspect they weren't at the time, and this is really from kind of your own strategizing. And not, but you know, you meant it, but at the same time, like you were trying to position yourself in a way that would be appealing, but you didn't have a playbook. You were figuring this out as you went.
100%. And I knew I didn't know a lot. I mean, I knew even though I was in insurance, I really needed someone, a seller, to also teach me the business. So it's very, very genuine. I needed to come in and learn the business and actually try to, you know, walk in their shoes for a year or two before I could, you know, make changes or do anything. So yeah. It was, you know, in many ways I got lucky.
Well, as we're going to find out, I as I recall from our pre-call, actually, there's a mandated pretty much 3 years that you need to be working with sellers in the industry.
I know.
And were you looking for traditional search funds, typically targeting bigger businesses than a self-funded searcher would be? Was that I assume that was the case then? How big a business were you looking for?
Yeah, I was trying to. So this was 2008 and 2009, and this was, you know, the economy. This was sort of a crisis time a little bit. And I started out right kind of before all that happened in my search, and then I found the deal as that was sort of all blowing up. And so I started, once I sort of got to the point where I got a deal, I started getting worried, oh man, this is too big. This is gonna be too tough to raise capital for it. It's hard calling your investors and asking for money when sort of they feel like the world's on fire. So I was trying to think. The business ended up was like $1.7 million in EBITDA, had about 50 employees, and it you know, it was sort of right in range what at traditional searchers at the time were doing.
We don't have time for all the ins and outs of it because we have another search story to get to, and then so much more after that. So, I guess jump us in to, you know, either the transition, anything you think would be most relevant to the audience in terms of the deal itself, negotiating the actual acquisition, or the transition, or the handover and working with whatever you think is most relevant for folks from that whole experience.
One thing that you know, a lot of searchers, not a lot of folks have bought an insurance broker, and it might be worth mentioning kind of what that is and what they do. And so, an insurance broker, it's also called an insurance agency. Really, we're sort of we function as a middle person, where businesses come, they hire us and say, hey, help me buy insurance. And then we go out and we talk to different insurance companies and get quotes from those different insurance companies and present them back to our client and connect them. And hopefully they buy insurance through like a Travelers or Chubb or someone like that. And in exchange for that service that an insurance broker provides, you make a commission. And usually it's like a 10 or 15% commission on the premium. So that's kind of what we do. There's two kinds. There's a commercial insurance broker, which, you know, they do like property and casualty, which is sort of a workers' comp, general liability, auto insurance. And there's a whole separate service or broker type that does employee benefits. My background was on the commercial side, so that's kind of where I came in. I felt like, and I love the insurance business. It's a highly recurring revenue business. So usually insurance brokerages keep about 90% of their clients every year. Mm-hmm. So, you know, I look forward to the next year. I think we've got a very good chance of keeping 9 out of our 10 clients that we have on the books.
And so to be clear, that commission is a recurring commission, 10 or 15% for the duration of that insurance policy. That's great.
Yes.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. And so, and you know, I think it's people don't want to change insurance. It's change brokers. It could be kind of a hassle. And so and you know, if you give them great service and take care of them, and if they need to add a vehicle to their program, we do all that. When I bought the first business, multiples for insurance brokerages were like six times EBITDA.
Wow.
And
because the quality of revenue is so attractive?
It was, and it really was, you know, sort of what the market was then. Mm-hmm. But since then, a lot of private equity firms have gotten into the space. I think there's like 30 roll-ups going on right now in the insurance brokerage world. Wow. And they've bid up the multiples. And so now it's like 10 to 12 times EBITDA, what insurance brokerages go for. So that's sort of, and I got in at a really fortuitous good time. And the things that I worried about the most when I moved out to Madison and moved my family out there was, we call it's an elevator asset business. So there's no hard assets that you buy in this business. Mm-hmm. All of your assets go up and down the elevator every day. they're the team. Mm-hmm. And so you have this fear. All you really are doing is buying a client list. Mm-hmm. And all the people that work with the agency or brokerage, they usually have non-solicit agreements. So you kind of know, hey, they can't steal the business. The sellers typically have like a non-compete, which is like one step more formal, where they can't, compete at all. So I had that, but I was very panicked and worried about this elevator asset situation. So, if I got in there and it didn't go well, technically all the employees could just leave, and it could go to zero, immediately. And so that is the major worry about buying a business like an insurance brokerage, and it's very relationship driven. So a lot of these clients know the people in Madison. They don't know me. So I was really worried about that. And I think that for that reason, the deal structure in insurance agencies is such that it's very common. Almost 100% of the time we have an earnout. We have like a 3-year earnout, and the seller needs to stick around for 3 years. And usually like 25 to 30% of the purchase price is allocated towards the earnout. So that's there's ways to solve that elevator asset issue, but it freaked me out. It's still something I think about all the time because you realize it's all we really have as a client list.
Well, August, hearing you say that, it's so many of the businesses that my guests buy are similar or frankly worse because an insurance policy is tighter. The recurring nature of the revenue is more contractual and higher quality. So, a commercial janitorial business or a commercial landscaping business, same thing. There's no elevator involved because those are going to be blue collar businesses, but it's just the relationships and your team that you're buying, and those contracts are probably way less secure than an insurance business. So, so I don't mean to minimize your fear. It just makes the landscaping and janitorial of the businesses of the world seem even more vulnerable, frankly.
And I think that was the big deal dynamic, is trying to figure out the people there. Are they going to stick around? Yeah. Are they going to help the business grow? All that stuff. So that was my main concern. Also my wife is a West Coaster. She's from Portland, Oregon. Mm-hmm. And I'm from St. Louis, so I'm kind of used to winters, but we moved to Madison in February. And she was like, what did you get me into? It's so cold there that time of year. So those were the two areas where I was worried.
August, it's funny. I moved my family and wife from the Bay Area to Arlington, Virginia, which is a suburb right outside DC, last year. And I timed it to avoid August, which is just the swampiest, hottest, nastiest, most humid time of the year. Yeah. So that on day one she wasn't like, "What have you done?" But by the way, given that Madison wasn't on the list of 10 cities, also she's already making an exception to the rules. How did you? What did you say to make an exception?
I think what she had, it's really hard being a spouse. I know you guys have talked about this before in your podcast, but especially when you're moving. Every day I'd come home and maybe we're going to move here, maybe we're going to move there. And so I started getting excited about Madison. And I remember the deal, deals fall apart like 4 times. I remember I came home from work one time. It's off. It's not happening. Don't worry. Let's focus on some other city. And she was genuinely bummed. Oh. And she hadn't expressed that she was excited about Madison, but I could tell she was like genuinely bummed. And she's like, well, I looked at some houses and I looked at the schools and I was sort of starting to think about it. Yeah. So I woke up that morning, I'm like, I got to figure out how to get this deal back on track.
That's cool.
And I did.
Well, Madison is renowned for being family friendly, isn't it? I mean, it's a great town for
yeah.
And
it is.
my parents actually met there too, so I have a soft spot for Madison. Cool.
It's the best.
Cool. All right. So you're feeling a lot of anxiety about the elevator asset nature of this business, and as you've explained to us, because of this, it's what are kind of typical terms in the insurance business when there's an acquisition is that the seller is you're working alongside the seller for 3 years, and there's an earn-out structure. So how did all of that go?
This was a hard part for me. It was the seller dynamic, and I was thinking about it. The seller rolled 10%. The seller had a seller note. The seller had an earn-out, and the seller was our landlord. So I had to get along with this person. And you know, I think in many ways he was very much still kind of my boss. And so it was, but yet I was a CEO, and I was in charge of like driving the direction of the company. And I think, you know, ultimately what ended up happening is we sort of went through this first year or two where it's kind of the honeymoon period, and I was learning the business and things were going pretty well. But then towards the second or third year, I think just naturally, I mean, we're both sitting right next to each other in offices. He's super worried about his earnout and stressed about it. He's counting on it for retirement. I'm thinking about other things and growing and trying to learn the business. And so naturally, like tension and friction develops. And I tried so hard. I think we both did. Tried so hard to get along and make it work, but it just felt like there were two cooks in the kitchen. And when that third year came up, I was like, you know, it's time. We sort of he moves on, he retires, and I sort of move forward and drive the growth of the business. But that was another big area I was very worried about. I really had to make sure that this relationship was going well. You know, and I had to transition all those clients and get to know them and all the employees. And so it was tricky. And I think one thing that I've sort of learned through this whole process is there's two ways I would probably do it if I could do it again. One is, you know, try to give the seller, if I ended up buying another insurance business, really give the seller autonomy to run the business and control their own earnout and not meddle. Or have an agreement with the seller where they're going to leave right away. But in the middle where I'm really meddling and we're working close together and, you know, we're not totally have our incentives aligned, it's just sort of inevitable that there's going to be friction. And so that was a big challenge, and a big part of the Madison story was working through that relationship.
Well, the something you'll hear a lot is kind of buyers, searchers want that seller, kind of want them leashed to the business so that they can't run away with all of the business still locked up in their heads or not support you if there's a problem or what have you, which is valid. And sometimes that really is needed. But then on the other side, like once you kind of got your arms around the business, many searchers find that they would just want the seller out of there as ASAP. Like once they've used the seller for what they've needed them for, better that they not be there in the room anymore. Sort of thing. Yeah,
I agree. That was my feeling too.
But go ahead.
Go ahead. Well, I was going to say one thing that on that I was afraid of clients leaving because I didn't have that relationship. And early on, we had a sales producer leave. And so I was worried, oh boy, all their clients are going to leave. And this person had a big chunk of our business. So I got in a car and went out to see all these clients and said, hey, my name's August and I'm from St. Louis and I'm new here. Would you stick with us? I know the producers, I know the salesperson, just would you stick with me for a year or two? And maybe it's because people in Wisconsin, you've heard that expression, Wisconsin nice. They were too nice to, but they stuck with me, which was amazing. And I sort of started to get confidence. Hey, I could keep these clients if the seller left or if a key salesperson left. And I think that sort of rings true with a lot of searchers as you start to go through. I can do this. I can make this work. So.
Well, but do you think it was also to your credit that you were so proactive about it, that you literally knocked on doors and hat in hand and said, "Give me a chance"?
Yeah.
Is that the takeaway that you should do? You should really lay it on. If these relationships,
Yes. I think you got to show up in person, be genuine, say, hey, here's what happened, but don't worry, I'm going to take care of you and deliver. And so that, people gave me a chance. And that really worked out through that whole transition.
What's the name of this business, August?
It was called Murphy Insurance Group.
Insurance Group. Okay. And what about becoming a leader for the first time?
That was also something. So I think going into it, you feel like you got it all figured out, and you're going to be a great leader. And then I feel like being a leader, there's like a huge magnifying glass on all of your strengths and all your weaknesses, and it's just magnified enormously when you step into a leadership position. And so one of the things that I think I felt like I really struggled with early on, as a leader, I felt very scripted. I felt like I was sort of running a playbook that wasn't really me. I was saying things that I'd read in a book or heard before. I felt like I didn't listen very well. I felt like I was sort of just ready to try to, not listen. I was listening with an intent to respond. You listen to someone, you're just all of a sudden while they're talking, you're thinking about what you're going to say without actually listening. And so I think those two things, I really struggle with. And I think people felt like they couldn't, I wasn't genuine. I wasn't sort of real. And I think learning to be that way and be comfortable with yourself as a leader is really hard. But once I sort of started doing that and being more me, things started to work a lot better, as opposed to sort of like, hey, I'm following the script. This is what you say. This is how you do it. It just comes off scripted, and people know, and people just don't like it. Yeah. And I think it's just really important to be you.
Well, it is. And I feel like that error, for lack of a better word, is just so common in all an experience. You overcompensate because you're insecure, and you try to, put on the hat of whatever role you're trying to fill. And people can see it from a mile away. And, with time, we all learn to be ourselves. And that's why old people are so refreshingly direct. Yeah. They just don't care anymore. But August, curious, how did you kind of get the message that you were coming off as fake and not a good listener?
So I had these two guys who I told you about at the beginning. They were on my board, and I almost talked to them almost daily. And I think I've got this. This was the beauty of the traditional search model, is you have this built-in group of investors, of very smart, capable, experienced people to guide you through that part. And so I've really counted on them to give me advice, give me coaching, and they were great at giving me honest, candid feedback. So I was totally indebted to their feedback as things were going, about how to tweak and become a sort of a better leader and be more comfortable in that position. So I had a great board. We had really great. It wasn't like a report out session. It was they were all strategy meetings. They were really fun. People gave me great ideas, great coaching and feedback, and it was almost like that period at traditional search was sort of like just a super. My learning curve was just straight up. And I really benefited from that sort of traditional model, that way. And I've heard searchers talk about this. Should you do traditional or search? That's the main thing that I just loved about that traditional model was that coaching.
The coaching of your investors, your investors in a traditional search fund, at least when you did it, were very involved with you as coaches, as a board. Okay, that's great. Well, we're going to get to the contrasts here in a minute because you also then did a self-funded search. Well, one other thing before I also want to hear about the exit of Murphy, your exit, but also the cultural, it wasn't kind of going into, it wasn't in Madison proper, was it? It was a little outside Madison?
Yeah. It was about 20 minutes north of Madison, this town called Wanakee. Famous as being the only Wanakee in the world. Loved it. It culturally, it was a very sort of informal, everyone knew each other in this little town. And that was sort of an adjustment to learn how to fit into that. It wasn't something where I really, said, hey, I'm from California. I moved out here from the Bay Area. That that wasn't like the best. I think people wanted someone from the Midwest, so I really played up my St. Louis background, and so that was hard too, is getting into that culture. But everyone in Wisconsin, I mean, everyone was just so nice. That was a huge part of it. Hard workers, just a great team.
Well, and because fitting into the culture of the business you buy, and so one of the themes comes up over and over is white collar people buying blue collar businesses, and the cultural gap there, bridging that gap where you're the outsider, you're typically going to be the white collar one. Was there any learnings there, or was it kind of more of just learning to lead this organization, be authentic, and
yeah, I think so. So my dad was in insurance, and I grew up watching him go to work in a suit and tie. And I look up to him, and I really, it was like, I bought an insurance business. I'm going to work with it with a tie on. And like the first week, I was like, this is not going to work in rural Wisconsin.
Okay.
So I mean, just
lose
little
the tie,
things,
August.
lose the tie.
Okay.
So those kind of things, they really, people see that. So I think I learned quickly.
Great.
Yeah.
So how does this adventure, your first search, a traditional search, come to a close?
So with many times in the traditional world, sort of the finish line is an exit, and many times that's like 5 to 10 years after you buy the business, and so we got to that point 5 or 6 years in. Multiples have gone up a lot. We had a good ride in terms of growth, but not incredible. We'd sort of struggle with some, getting the right salespeople on board and working through the seller transition. But we felt like, hey, the multiples are going up. This is 2015. It might be a good time to talk to a broker or a banker and see what kind of multiples we could get. So we went out. Had hired an investment banker who specializes in insurance, who knew all the players. We did a very sort of specific process where the banker was like, hey, we're going to just talk to 3 or 4, and we're going to have very casual, informal chats with these folks and tell them the story. And we're not going to send, this deal out to 30 people. And I think that really worked. We ended up getting like 4 very interested parties, all larger insurance brokers that most of them were backed by like a private equity roll up, and sort of went through all that process and sold. And as part of that, just like I had done, the new owner said, hey, August, we need you for a 3-year earnout. So I was kind of prepared for that going in. That was a big part of it. It could not be, hey, you're going to leave on day one. I think that would hurt the value of the business. And I was really committed to that 3 years and making that work. And we ended up selling to this firm called Hub International, which is a big, insurance broker that buys a lot of agencies. It's backed by a private equity fund. So it was exciting. It was like it was like just a mad dash. This 5 years, learned a ton. Then you go through this very high of selling your business. It was quite a ride.
So you had grown it somewhat, but not a ton. Yep. But you got to enjoy multiple expansion, if we can call it that, simply because the market multiples had gone up.
Correct. Yeah. Correct.
And just 2 things on the insurance business, going back to when you bought it in 2008-9, and how the world was coming apart then economically. That also would have been a good time to stress test the idea of like how recession resistant a particular business is. Yeah. And intuitively, it would seem like insurance is extremely recession resistant.
It is.
Did it prove to be even
Totally.
During a crisis like 2008?
Totally. It's kept growing. Everyone has to buy insurance. No one. It's one of it's like the last thing you'd probably have to give up if you're a business is no longer insuring yourself. Yeah. It pressure tested the drama with the seller. All those clients ended up being a lot stickier than I thought. Of the sort of 50 people that were there when I bought it, I think that only like 10 or 20 we totally had refreshed the whole team. Mm-hmm. We kept a lot of those clients. Maybe just being nervous and worrying wasn't really. It probably was worth it, but because you stay sharp when you're worried. But it all those things sort of played out, and it kind of worked out. And we got really lucky that multiples went up, and it was such an active market for selling an insurance agency. Got lucky with that.
And then, so were you literally there from 2015 when you sold through 2018?
Yeah,
at transitioning?
I was. And they put me sort of in charge of like a region, which was fun. I learned a lot. They're a professional buyer of agencies. So I learned a ton seeing how they did it and how they managed it. They made it seem a lot easier than when I did it myself. But I started feeling like during that earnout, like I mentioned, it's hard working for a bigger company. At least it was for me, after being an entrepreneur and having total control over your destiny and your time. And I was sort of plugged into a bigger company. It was a great firm, is a great firm. But for me, I started feeling, gosh, I still have more energy. I've got another venture in me. And so I started in my mind thinking during that period that, hey, I'd love to search again and do it again. So I did do the whole 3-year period though.
Great. Well, we're just about to get there. A couple follow-ups though. How old were you at this time?
I was 35.
35 in 2015.
Yeah.
Or in 2018.
Yeah, exactly. When I finished it, I was 38 when I got out of there. Yeah.
And then we are the same age.
Yeah.
And August, so a searcher contemplating buying an insurance business or agency or brokerage, they do need to, this kind of 3 years at the start, 3 years at the end intrigues me. You really, if that's the industry norm, you got to be prepared for a 3-year transition with the seller. Although, as we've talked about, maybe that'll be cut short because that is a very long time. But then if you're expecting to then exit the business at some point, you are likely going to be expected to stay in the business for a 3-year transition. So that strikes me as kind of a big deal. Calculation, big deal to something to consider before you dive into the insurance world.
Yeah, it is. And I think if you signal anything but to a buyer that's going to buy your agency that you're not going to do it, I think they'd have red flags. And I think many buyers of agencies wouldn't do a deal unless the seller was going to stay on for an earnout period. And now what they've sort of learned even further is they're really almost insisting that sellers of agencies roll equity, a sizable amount of equity. So they're totally in it, totally incentives aligned. And you sort of help erase that worry about those elevator assets issue because the seller is going to have equity and they're going to be there for 3 years. And, that's not a problem. So
great. Thank you, August. Okay. So you're 38 and you're getting the entrepreneurial itch again. Think you might have another rodeo in you. What do you look to do? Are you guys still in Madison at this point?
Still in Madison. We had 4 kids now.
Wow.
Young, pretty young kids. And if there's anybody listening to this or watching this that's from St. Louis, they'll know that a lot of St. Louisans love kind of coming back to St. Louis. And so that's always kind of been in my mind. I don't know why that. It's just such a great place to, if you're from there, to raise a family. So I'd always been telling my wife, it'd be fun to get back to St. Louis. Maybe would you think about it? What do you think? So during that earnout period, my wife's like, okay. We'll if you could find something or do something in St. Louis, we'll do it. So, as that period sort of wound down, I started really thinking about, hey, I'd love to do another one, buy another agency. Multiples had gone up, so I knew that I couldn't buy it had to be a very small one. Something that was kind of under the radar of all the, what the bigger brokers would buy. I wanted it to be in St. Louis. So there was like 10 of them or 15 of them. It was a very limited, sample size. So I sort of identified these 10 or 15, little agencies in St. Louis, and started cold calling, just redid the process and started cold calling, going down there and, doing breakfast and buying lunch, and one seller in particular here in town was, it was a husband-wife team. Like, we'll sell it to you. We love the story. We love what you've done, and they in 2019, I closed on another agency here in St. Louis and did it totally self-funded this time. I sort of felt like, one of the things that there was so many good things about the first deal, but the one thing that I thought about is I sold when I felt like I was just getting good as a leader, and you sort of cut that off, and it's kind of like, okay, now you could still help out and impact the bigger company that bought you, but I felt like, you're definitely going to be a better CEO your second decade than your first decade. And I thought, hey, maybe if I could let it work in an industry too. I was starting to get good at the industry. I knew the players, I had all the relationships, I knew how it worked, and I was starting to get better and better and better. And so I thought with the second one, I really wanted to set it up where I could own it for 40 years, 30 years, and hopefully just really get into something where it keeps growing. I don't sort of interrupt that period where I'm improving, and sort of take advantage of all the things I learned. So self-funded worked out perfectly with that. You can buy, you can do whatever you want with it. You don't have to sell it. I think the biggest concern is, I brought on some debt, is making sure your lender's happy. But that's it. And so that the downside is, you kind of, when you buy a smaller business, many times this expression is used, you buy a job, and that's totally true. That's what I did. Very small business. We had like 6 employees.
Wow. Very small.
But I lined it up where I felt like, hey, I got a long time to try to do this and figure it out. And I've learned all this stuff going through the traditional model, and I learned a lot when I was at Hub and seeing that. So I thought it was like a perfect, I think the right thing to do.
Well, when you had bought the first business at Murphy, was that not also buying a job?
We were bigger. We had 50. We had some, we had accounting people. We even had an IT guy. It was incredible.
Yeah.
Here we had nothing. It was, you really learn the business when you do really small like that. Yeah. It's just a totally different job than when you buy a bigger business. And so that was like a shock. And I wasn't totally prepared for that. I figured that out quickly. But the benefit is sort of like, hey, this is a time where hopefully you can sort of build it, and you'll be, set the business up to own it for a longer time.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, what I'm reminded of, August, is Amir Habouche, who is buying HVAC businesses around the country, talks about what the types of operators or presidents, CEOs that he likes to put into the businesses if they need that. And basically the idea is you want somebody who was at a larger organization to then come to the smaller one, because they know, what the larger one should look like. And so they're the perfect candidate to grow the smaller one into the bigger one. And that's essentially what you did for yourself. You knew what a 50-person insurance agency looked like. And so you buy a 6-person one, and you kind of know what the 6-person one should look like when it grows up.
100%.
And August, at 6 employees, now I don't know, can you share anything about revenue at that level or no?
We were tiny. I think we were $1 million in revenue. And I think, EBITDA was under $500,000 in EBITDA. So very small business.
At that level, and given that you know the business really well already, although there's always more to learn, but you, as you said, you were getting the connections and you were just feeling really like starting to get a taste of kind of mastery of the insurance business, or at least a veteran of the insurance business. Did you consider starting from scratch at that point? If you're going to buy something is so small.
I did. I think I would have if I wouldn't have gotten lucky and found this deal. But I felt like buying something small would give me a 2 or 3 year jump start. Starting out, you got to get all the insurance licenses and software, and really starting from scratch. I think it's going to take a couple years, 2 or 3 years, just doing that stuff. So I felt like if I could do it, I'd give myself a little bit of a jump. But I was, in my back of my mind, I was ready to start from scratch if this wouldn't have come up. Yeah, that's a great question. Just curious, when you were doing your outreach when you got back to St. Louis, before you said you didn't even do email back in 2008-9, were you sending emails this time around, or are you still old school phone in person? I still did a lot of phones and a lot of handwritten notes. And the seller who I ended up selling to, when I came in to see him, he had my handwritten note on his desk that I'd sent from like months before. And I think that sort of resonated with him. And so it takes a lot longer. But I felt like, you kind of got to do what no one else is doing. And just try to be different. And so that worked, it was sort of a way to sort of, kind of show him who I am and come, and sort of just, distinguish myself from other buyers.
Yeah, for sure. Although I don't want to leave the audience with the impression, go start writing handwritten notes, only to say, because you had so much, there was so much in that handwritten note, I'm sure, that was also, it was like, I'm a native of St. Louis. I want to come home. I have a family with 4 kids. I just spent, I guess, 10 years buying an insurance business outside Madison, growing it and selling it. So I know what I'm doing. So there were so many things about you that was like, wow, this guy is worth talking to. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. I've talked to searchers who are friends, and the second time around is much easier. And almost everyone says that. I don't know why that is exactly. I guess it's just because you have confidence and credibility, and you can kind of, skip what doesn't work. But I found that really true. Second time was much easier.
And what about any kind of non-compete? How can you dive right back into the same industry?
It's a great question. So I had a non-compete in Wisconsin. So I kind of had to leave. I like, if I was going to work in insurance, I had to leave Wisconsin. And so being able to work in Missouri and St. Louis, that worked. And so that sort of fit. And you obviously can't go after any of your old clients or any of that stuff. And I've always felt like you got to really honor those things and try to, do it. You have clients call you and you got to say, hey, I got 2 years. Call me in 2 years, or whatever the time period was be. And, that's how that kind of went down.
Okay. And so you're returning now to doing self-funded. Could you bring all the necessary equity and capital for the deal yourself?
I did. Yeah, I did it myself. And I found I didn't do an SBA deal. I found a lender who was in the insurance business. It's like an insurance company, but they had a bank attached to it. And I reached out to them and they said, yes, we'll do it. It kind of mirrored what an SBA deal was, a 10-year deal. But they knew insurance. I think they felt comfortable with my background. So that really they've been just a wonderful partner, and they know the industry. They've helped me on various things. So that was how I financed it myself and with this bank, senior debt.
And the vision is, this will probably be, something that I heard you say 40 years. I think on the pre-call you said pass it on to your kids if they're interested. This really is, this is a long-term thing. And by not having any investors and doing self-funded versus traditional, you have that autonomy, that freedom to choose to chart your own course and however long you want to do it. And that's the vision.
Yeah, that's my plan. I because there's so many roll-ups going on in insurance, we're now sort of unique that we're independent.
Oh,
I love that. I think that's cool.
Yeah,
and I think that helps with recruiting. I think it helps with talking to clients. In St. Louis, just here alone, almost every of the big agencies has been bought. We're one of the few independents left. I sort of have this. It's this vision of trying to also create a brand, and I think creating a brand takes a lot of time.
Yep.
I mean, I really want to have Oberle be just viewed and deliver as just a super high quality, great firm that's special. And that's going to take like years. And so I want to sort of try to build that. That's what gets me out of bed every day. And that's what gets people excited here, is trying to do that. And I've got a long time to do that, which is really, I think, helpful. And that's really my main driver right now, is to one day, hopefully people say, Oberle, they're just they're the best. And that's what we're really working for. And
2 follow-ups to that, August. What is being the best in insurance? Just high touch, basically great customer service, essentially, for your client service?
Yeah. I think, customer service is is everything we do. And, basically people don't love buying insurance. I know people aren't excited about doing it, but if we can make it very easy and hassle-free, that's a huge win. If we can have people that totally trust us, we're almost like their insurance person, like they're out there, part of their company. We got it handled.
Yep.
And that if we have their best interests in mind, we're going to find them the best deal. And there's some great competitors in this space, but there's a lot of people that aren't, that give kind of insurance agents a bad name. I like that because we can be the anti that. And I think that, and again, it takes years and years and years of work to try to earn that from people, and build that. But that's 100% what I'm focused on. I'm not looking at buying any other add-on acquisitions. I'm really focused on that. I'm really focused on trying to recruit, find great people, which is brutal. I'm sure people talk about that.
Yep.
And really trying to grow it organically.
That's awesome. And Oberly, the brand name, what does it mean? Where does it come from?
So the business I bought was called CLH Insurance here. And, I want to have my own, brand and name. And so I was like, how do you pick a name for a company? So I had someone in Madison that I knew that was like a marketing person. And she said, well, we're going to have lunch and we're going to go through it. But before we go lunch, email me every street you lived on, every maiden name in your family, every possible name in your world. I sent her like 100 names. Where I grew up in, where, like my dorm name and college, everything.
Yeah. Grandma's middle name.
Everything.
Yeah.
I pulled out all the stops. And I sat down and she pointed to one name. She says, Oberly. That's got to be it. I'm like, why? And she said, well, it's unique. And she had looked it up, and it was it means kind of, it's a German, an old German name, I think, that means kind of on a hill. It was like my great grandmother's maiden name or something. So that was sort of a good visual for me.
Yeah.
And it was a family name, an old family name. So I was like, that's perfect. Do it.
Cool.
Done.
I love it.
Yeah.
Okay, you bought it. It was 6 employees, and this was 2019?
Yep.
19.
Yep.
And how many employees are you today?
15.
All right. And while we're kind of in and out of the world of insurance brokerage, you touched on the license. Like if you had started from scratch, it would have meant getting a lot of licenses. This is something that readers will tweak me about not asking more, which I should do. For the searchers out there who might be interested in this space, what does it look like to be an outsider without any sort of insurance licensing? What are the requirements there? What should they be aware of?
It's not getting an insurance license isn't that hard. It probably should be harder. You don't have to go to school. You don't have to get a degree. But what we do is it's very critical. So if you mess it up, it always amazes me how sometimes some people say it's easy to get a license, but we need to get licensed in every state. Insurance is regulated on a state by state basis. There's not like a federal regulatory body. So it's more of the administrative hassle of going to every single state and signing Oberly up and getting a license and waiting weeks, 2-3 weeks. You got to apply for it. That's the biggest thing. The other hard part about sort of starting from scratch is insurance companies are partners with us, like a Travelers, for example. And they decide who's going to sell Travelers product or who's going to, be able to distribute Travelers insurance policies. So it's called appointing. So they appoint you. And it's hard to get those appointments. So I'd have to call, if I started from scratch, every single insurance company, say Travelers, we've got this business called Oberly, and they would go back and forth for a few months or maybe even a year and then appoint us. But by buying something smaller that already had all those appointments and all those licenses, I kind of just skipped all that stuff. And that was hard. So getting an insurance license, it's more of an administrative thing than it is like, going to school or anything like that.
And do you just there's just a blanket insurance license, or do you have to get sub-licenses for the various kinds of insurance?
Yep. You're right. It's you have to get a commercial insurance license and then a life and health license. And, I had to get those myself, and then I got to get Oberly to get every single one too. And then if a new person starts here and they're not licensed, they got to go do a class and a course and take a test to get a license.
Okay. So August, as we touched on at the top, you are a sponsor, and so you're quite involved in the search community because you have searchers as clients, and it's actually been a great niche for you, but mutually. I mean, you've helped a lot of searchers, and a lot of searchers have come to you for that help. It's kind of compounding. Well, first, why do you think it's a kind of a good niche? Because you are a 2-time searcher, or is there something specific about searchers that makes it a good niche?
I guess one is I love working in the niche, so that's important, right? If you don't love it, you got a problem. So I love working with searchers. These are people who are putting their careers and their lives on the line to buy a business and moving there. It's inspiring. It pumps me up. I love trying to help. And I know the feeling of being scared and nervous and jumping and taking that leap. But then, this all kind of started when I first bought the first one, and there was a group of traditional searchers and we all kind of knew each other. And, a couple of them called and said, "Hey, I'm going to buy this business and I know nothing about insurance. Can you just take an hour call and walk me through everything I need to know about insurance? I've never bought insurance in my life. I need to make sure this is right. I'm not stepping into a problem here." And that's essentially what we do today is searchers call and say, "Hey, I'm buying a landscaping business, for example, and I've never purchased insurance before. Can you just guide me and tell me what I need to know and make sure I'm not making mistakes and help me get it all organized for closing?" Searchers don't, unlike private equity, they don't have like a deal team. They don't have like 4 people working on their deal. It's just them. They have to do the accounting diligence, the legal diligence, the lenders, the equity, the sellers, everything. It's very, very hard. And so if we can come in and just sort of make the insurance part easy, educate them, explain them what it is from someone that's done it before that they can really trust, that's what we do. And it's, it started out just kind of a couple projects here and there, and it's grown and grown and grown. It's primarily what Overly does now. And, we're doing self-funded. We work with traditional. We've got some accelerator clients, some independent sponsors, all sort of in the middle market to small business group. And it's so fun to stay connected with it. I love it. I feel like we can really help. And it's been really fortunate, and we've benefited because the world has grown so much in searching, thanks to, people like you, Will, and all the conferences and people teaching it at the business schools. It's really been just a fun, great niche.
That's awesome, August. And are there any things that you see over and over that are, potential red flags in the insurance setup of target acquisitions? Like anything that's just a pattern that you could just advise folks now about this piece of their acquisition, the insurance piece?
Yeah, I think, a small business person who's selling their business, they're pretty scrappy and they're pretty clever. And they will, when it comes to insurance, they'll try to cut areas here or not buy insurance here or do different things. And I think the biggest surprise we have is when we look at it, we say, the seller is really, they're not buying 2 or 3 important things they should buy. Now, it's totally up to you if you want to end up buying those when you buy the business, but we think you should. But I think it's just sort of that realization that things are kind of thin when they buy a business. And many times we have clients end up paying just a little bit more than the old business was paying. And that's because the searcher's like, well, I want to make sure if I have a claim for that, it's covered. And those are sort of the bigger, that's very common.
And is there a particular type of insurance or types of insurance that sellers will skimp on?
I think they like, for example, they don't have a board, sellers won't, so they won't have directors and officers insurance where, a searcher might have a board, so they'll have to put that in. Sometimes they do funny things with the auto insurance. They'll buy it personally, or they'll do all kinds of quirky things with that. We see, Also, there's this thing called an umbrella insurance, which is like excess insurance in case there's like a really bad claim. And many times sellers are like, oh, I'll never have a bad claim. I don't need to buy that. But we've seen those claims. So those are kind of the areas where we see people kind of skimp on it.
You know, the reason to not skimp on insurance is obviously to get the value that insurance provides, namely protection from some sort of bad thing happening. But it also strikes me as like, this is kind of part of the professionalization process that so many searchers are intending to do to their target acquisition, which is, a big boy company has proper insurance. It doesn't. It's not cutting corners on some of this stuff.
Yeah, absolutely.
Is there anything more on the insurance industry that we haven't touched on? I think I'm just looking at my notes here, and I think we've touched on a lot of it. Are there? You had said that there's been so much consolidation. You're actually the only indie left in St. Louis. So, are there even opportunities for searchers today?
I get called pretty regularly about searchers who are interested in doing it. I think just that shock about multiples is sort of the big issue. Is you got to pay 8 to 10 times EBITDA now, and a lot of investors in the traditional space don't want to do that, or hesitant to do that. It's tough to grow an insurance agency organically because you think about it, everybody's got 90% retention, everyone. So there's an issue there.
Yeah.
And so that is a challenge is figuring that out. It's tough to find salespeople that are, great, that can sell insurance, that can do that. It's a rare personality. We do a lot of personality sort of profiling when we're trying to find the right hires. And I had a consultant tell me that like a true salesperson who's really like a true blue, like incredible, like 3 or 4% of the population has that type of personality that can go out and do that. So just by that nature, it's rare to find that person who can help you bring you into your insurance business and help you grow it. So those are all the challenges, but all the great stuff that's still, I always thought is still there with the business. It's good recurring revenue. It's good margins. It's steady. It's recession proof. I think with interest rates going up, I've read a lot about that deal activity is slowing down. Like deal activity in the first half of the year is much lower than, I guess, 20% lower than it was last year. I think that some of these roll-ups have a lot of debt, so I think that's going to impact them. So I think that maybe these times are changing a little bit with the interest rates and all those kind of things. And if it does become more attractive, I would love to try to buy one or do something, but right now it's just I can't make the math work just myself.
And August, I feel like in the 90s, insurance brokers served consumers as well, and then I'm going to guess that the internet kind of killed that, and we all just go to Progressive or Geico directly, or our health insurance from employers, many of them, most folks. But it hasn't, obviously, for commercial insurance. Is that a threat, right? Or is that threat come and gone in commercial insurance? Because it's just too complex for somebody to point and click their way through it.
I think about it. I'm not too. I mean, it could always happen, and I think on the smaller sort of really cookie cutter type businesses, they might go direct. But it's still very, very confusing, and there's so many choices that to have someone out there kind of walk you through it. And I will note on the personal insurance, like your own personal or auto, there's a big number of people, I don't know what the percentage is, that still go through an agent. Oh, huge. That don't go direct. And these are folks, who are like, hey, okay, I got a house in Wisconsin, and then I got my, a cabin up north. How do I insure that? And I got a teenage driver. How does that work? And, all of that stuff. So they end up going through an agent too, and that's stayed pretty consistent. Geico and Progressive have kind of picked up some of the more price buyers, but I think folks who need more help and looking for value go through an agent. And I think with Geico, one of the things that those carriers, I mean, they spend so much money on advertising it's almost like that's their commission expense that they would pay to an insurance broker. They pay in advertising. So one way or the other, they've made their choice. And so I think that the insurance companies we work with, give us commissions. So we're the salespeople, whereas Geico, they're just doing it that way. It's a good question, though.
August, just a couple more questions for you. I want to zoom out now and just kind of talk about search generally and your observations, and then ask you a personal question. So, you kind of touched on the fact that the search ecosystem has grown a lot since your time. And any other observations to make about now versus 2008 with respect to people buying businesses?
I think all I could say is I just think it's great. I think that more and more people have confidence because others are doing it, that they can do it and make that leap. And I think that's just been fun to see people who've totally changed their lives by doing a search fund. And that is a big one. I think there's probably always been self-funded, but now it's really it's more specifically called self-funded searching, and that's grown a ton. I think traditional has grown, but I feel like self-funded probably has grown even more. And that's a huge trend that we've seen. Is just more and more folks are sort of doing that self-funded path. And I think there's more information out there than ever. So I think it's been great to see. And I think it's going to keep growing because it's a great path.
We also got some contrast between your first experience buying a business as traditional search fund, and then your second as a self-funded. Is there anything more we can say about those two experiences? Maybe the difference in feeling. One contrast is often owner versus CEO. Do you feel like that is applicable in your case? Do you feel more of an owner versus? Did you feel like more of a CEO with Murphy?
I think that's right. I've had to really proactively reach out to people in my network to help supplement that coaching and support I got when I was in a traditional world, and kind of formalize it a little bit, have sort of a group of people I talk to all the time that I can commiserate with. Whereas in the traditional world, it was sort of baked in. And so that is something that I sort of had to proactively do. Sometimes I felt myself getting frustrated that I bought a really small business and I wish it would go faster. And I was like, only if I was back to where I was. I've had that emotion. Sometimes it's hard to recruit being really small. I mean, you can sort of be the David and the Goliath, and you can use that as a selling point when you're recruiting. But it's also people like, why would I join it? Is that a risk? I'm joining an 8-person company. Why would I leave a big firm? I got these benefits. It's just tougher. And so those things are real in terms of difference. But I have when I look back on it, I really think it was the right way to kind of go about it. Because I learned so much in the traditional world, and then I sort of had this confidence to do it all with myself on the self-funded side.
It reminds me of something that Derek Turner, a recent guest, said, who also, like you, did a traditional search fund first and then a self-funded. Yeah. And he said that his traditional search fund, he chose to do a traditional search fund first because it felt like a good on-ramp to search, because you have structured terms, a structured communities, and then these investors that you can lean on, kind of guardrails. And then he stepped out of that business and went on to buy another business as a self-funded searcher, and really had, in retrospect, felt that was accurate, that he felt kind of much more equipped to be a self-funded searcher, having done a traditional search fund the first time around. Yeah,
100%. Totally agree. That's exactly my experience too. I that's exactly how I felt.
Great. Anything we didn't touch on, August?
No, I think that's great, Will. I love it. I could talk insurance all day.
Well, I'll have to see if I can find any other searcher out there who's bought an insurance business and get their take on it. But August, what's the best place for people to reach out to you other than clicking that link in the show notes that appears every other episode?
that link is great. Or just, shoot me a note on LinkedIn or our website, oberle-risk.com. Those are the best ways, or call me too. Yeah.
August, thanks so much for coming on. This was a really fun conversation. And thanks for being so great to my listeners who reach out to you for help. I hear nothing but good things through the community about Oberle. So more where that came from.
Awesome. Thank you, Will.
I hope you enjoyed that interview. Make sure you subscribe to the Acquiring Minds channel below. We are now publishing twice a week, so tons of new interviews and stories to come. Stories that will help you along your own path to acquiring a business.